Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of After Church Tea Time, where we discuss the service and sermon that just unfolded. Yeah, I'm very happy to be with you today. And I'm accompanied by Gabby and Lucy. And as we are going to discuss this beautiful sermon by Jose and Michaela on the divine formula for relationships. It was a beautiful sermon, very long, with a lot of steps, a lot of good insights on relationships, and the service as well. The whole service was very, very divine. I felt very unified. So yeah, let's begin. How did you feel about the sermon by Jose and Michaela?
I really loved the analogy of the boundaries in relationships being akin to not tromping through someone's house with muddy feet. That really struck me and stood out to me because I had never conceptualized a boundary in that way, of it just being a matter of honoring and valuing the space that you've entered. And so thinking about a relationship in that way, it's really cool to imagine it as these are the terms of the relationship so that we are both honoring and respecting this space that we share. That really stood out to me.
That stood out to me too, because, in the past, I would always think about boundaries as something that I didn't like because it always, the word boundary in my upbringing was done with anger. And it's actually just a sign of respect. Boundaries are actually really beautiful. And I really appreciated when Jose was sharing that once you get a sense of how to relate, it's easy. It's not something that has to be hard. You just get, once you get it kind of thing.
Yeah, I think boundaries for me my whole life have been a boundary would be synonymous with stay away from me. You know what I mean? This is my bubble. Do not enter my bubble. This is the boundary. Stay far, far away, instead of it being viewed as these are the terms of the relationship.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I think because we didn't learn what was a true boundary from our upbringing, possibly that's why it feels harsh to us, or maybe foreign, or we didn't really knew what was a boundary before we practiced it in our twin flame journey and in all of our relationships. And I feel that's why this this introduction from Jeff in the class of TFAS, welcome to Twin Flame Ascension School, where you learn to have a relationship, is so true because this is the foundation of the work. It's to learn to have a relationship with God, yourself, your twin flame, but also with everyone else, because that's not something that we had growing up. So obviously we're trying to heal that. And I think with the recent healing shared by Shaleia about sexual energy and our childhood and how it unfolded and what it brought to a lot of divine feminines in the community, I think more than ever we realize that it's important to have boundaries. We don't realize until we heal it, how much energy it was taking from us. And so I think that's why this sermon was so important. What do you want to say, Lizzie?
I was just agreeing with Gabby. But yeah, I agree, you know, when what you shared about boundaries growing up, and then what Gabby shared earlier about like the boundary is like, stay away from me. I did have to heal a little bit of that because in our community, people are learning how to, we're all learning how to express, you know, here's how I love to be related to. I don't really like that over there, but this is what feels good to me. Please, can you do this? Or, you know, an example is like messaging, like using Messenger. Sometimes there's like been a culture of like, I demand you to speak with me right now, and why aren't you replying to me? And you know, that sort of thing. And in the past, I've had you know, someone communicated to me like, please don't message me so much, something to the effect of that. And so it provided me some healing because I could have looked at it as I had when I was young and like, oh, stay away from me. I don't want to talk with you. That's what I could have interpreted that as. But what it was actually doing is like, here's how we can have a loving relationship. And there was love there. So that, you know, is something that our community, I feel like, is really strong in really knowing that there's love. And, you know, it's like oil off a duck's back. Oh yeah, sure. I don't mind. I'll, you know, connect with you over here. There's been a learning process for me too, with regard to how do you be friends? What are friendships like? Like how are defined friendships? And learning how to really respect and honor and see each other and our purpose in each other's lives, and relate on that level. It's very different from many friendships that I've had in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved how Jose brought up like it's not only like healing for you to be placing boundaries and honoring your energy, it's also just as healing to have boundaries placed on you if you're willing to heal there. You know what I mean? Like when, like you said, you received a boundary from someone, that is a gift of healing in itself. So really taking the time to look at all of the boundaries that exist in your life, not just the ones that you've placed, but the ones that have been placed on you, to like see what message and what gift lies in that boundary so that you can heal through it and grow and expand from there.
Yeah, and I also feel that the sermon was an invitation to revisit all of our relationships and see like where we are leaking energy and when we can have better boundaries. And I think it was a nice support, a nice cushion to do that because like it removed, I think for me, it like removed like definitely the sense that it was a harsh thing. I saw it as um, as a divine thing instead, more than ever. And yeah, I love that Jose like established right away that it was a relationship with God. Like if you have to master one relationship, it's with God, and you have a relationship with God, with a lot of things through your life. And so have to ask yourself that question, like, would I disrespect my relationship with God? Like, I need to value myself to have a relationship with God who values himself. Otherwise, like, the communication is going to be difficult. And so it's loving for me to value myself, because then I can have this communication with my creation, with my creator. And so what would I do for that? I would do anything for that. personally. So like it shifts the perspective of you know, it's not about like it's not really about a person's feeling. It's not about like relating how you used to relate to that person. It's more like what is love right now? What is loving right now? And it's so freeing on our energy and on others to realize that, like how much we are gonna grow after that because we realize that boundaries are so important. How much energy we're gonna have because each of us as human beings, we value ourselves and we say to the universe, this is my relationship with God and it's important and let's grow from there. Like I think it's beautiful. And yeah, in that sense, I think it's the divine formula for relationships because it's so like it's simple. It's hard to swallow maybe when you weren't like brought up that way, but it's so simple and so loving that when you do that you apply that to all your relationships and all of your life even, then you're gonna have like tremendous results.
Yeah, I love that connection piece there of um kind of what Jose was saying about like you have this perception that having boundaries means you have to be alone and just like push people away, and that if you have all these boundaries that you're just going to end up alone and there's not going to be anyone there connecting with you. And that's just like one of those lies that we hang on to. We're like, no, if we set this boundary, we're going to lose people, right? And it's exactly the opposite, right? All of the people that are taking our energy and like that we're wasting energy on are going to be the ones that fall away, and the ones in our reality are going to be the ones reflecting that relationship that we have with God, because at its center that is exactly like the relationships all around us, like you were saying, Yureen, are just a reflection of our relationship with our creator. And the stronger our relationship is with our creator, the stronger the relationships are going to be around us with the people in our lives, because it'll be reflected in those relationships. We're only ever having that one relationship, right? And that's what's being reflected to us. So it's actually like really loving to focus all of our energy on that one relationship and then allow it to expand in all of the relationships in our life.
That was beautiful. I loved what you just shared, Gabby, and Yoreen as well. And yeah, moving from this idea that like boundaries means you're going to be alone to boundaries means you can find enjoyment actually in interacting with people. It brought up something that it made me think of something about manners. Like, you're sitting at a table and you use your utensils instead of your hands, and maybe you put the glass in, I think in the West, I think we have the glass on the right side. You're sitting at a large table with other people, and instead of, reaching for the food and grabbing it and glomming down like a heathen, we have manners. We have these kind of like rules of relating to each other at the table. And I just thought, well, when you're a child, you're like, no, why can't I eat that cake with my hands? And of course, I think like little 1-year-olds have these things called smash cakes where you can do that. But aside from that, we use a fork and a knife, and there's a reason. So that crumbs don't go everywhere, so that you don't get a mess on your friend's shirt or whatever it is. And also, if you're not, you know, glomming down on the food really fast, like you can actually relate to each other and have a conversation and dialogue as you eat. I mean, that's just one example, but that's something that I thought of where like that is manners or boundaries, right? Like they're just the way of relating. And I also thought about how sometimes I'll watch Twin Flame Ascension School and I will be in my pajamas, and that's totally okay and acceptable. But there are some times and I'm like, you know what? I want to put on a nice outfit. No one's going to see me but God. But it's just like getting into the habit of like, for me, I mean, everyone's different, but like being respectful towards myself. And if someone else were around me, it would be respectful towards them. To, you know, not to obsess with how I look, but just to be clean and wear deodorant, you know, things like that. And I just thought about how, you know, you're always with God. And it's not that God doesn't love you if you don't wear deodorant, but for me, it was just like I wanted to be like respectful, and it felt good to me to, you know, put on a nice outfit and really love myself and God in my relationship like that. Plus, with COVID, like, you know, in the past we didn't get to go out as much, so I didn't have as many occasions to wear nice things. So yeah, those are the things that I thought about.
It's nice. It's like a little habit to relate to God. It's perfectly like on point with what we're discussing, because like it's your moment, like with God, you know. It's really cute. And what I heard from like your manners example is that manners like enable us to be together, and it's the contrary of that thought that boundaries will get you alone. And expanding on that thought, I think like the only way we could think that we would end up alone because of boundaries is because we're attached to relationships and thinking that attachment is love. And I think a lot of us like think that way at the beginning of our journey, our twin flame journey. And yeah, as we grow spiritually, I think we understand what is the difference. As Jose says, we're most sensitive to what is love, what is loving, and what is not. And we realize that love and attachment are very different, and that boundaries are actually safe, and we have nothing to fear there. So, yeah, but well, it's just a thought that popped up, but I think it's like the logical thought after, like, you know, what if boundaries get me alone, you know? And so when we analyze all of our journeys, I think we've never been alone. Like on the contrary, we've found people that relate to us, that actually love us, truly love us, because we've grown and because we've had boundaries. And yeah, I just felt like putting that out there, like maybe if there was some remaining fear of boundaries.
Yeah, it's also like so important to communicate those boundaries, kind of like what Jose and Michaela were talking about as the revealing process, right? If you find yourself in like a relationship with someone and you're not sure if that relationship is giving to you or taking from you or what have you, right? Because it's one or the other. There aren't any neutral relationships. Like sometimes people are like, well, they've never done anything, you know, wrong. So I still have a relationship with this person. And it's like, okay, but are they giving to you? Are you giving to them? Is it truly like a divine relationship or not? It's important to look at those relationships and ask yourself those questions like, what am I giving to this relationship? What are they giving to this relationship? Is it truly a relationship, or is it, like you said, Yureen, just an attachment? Have we just been friends for 20 years and that's why like we have a relationship? You know what I mean? Like that's an attachment in that case, because that relationship is not giving, right? You're not giving to them, they're not giving to you. It's just an attachment. And so like I loved how they were talking about how every single thing in Jeff and Shalea's house has a purpose, right? Everything, every single thing they've put in their house has been blessed and serves a purpose in their home. Like, we can think about our relationships with other people in the same way. Is every single one of our relationships blessed? Is it loving? Is it divine? Is it giving? Is there like a reason that that relationship is in our life beyond mere attachment or not?
That reminds me, Gabby, of in Romance Attraction, Shaleia shares, you know, as you examine your relationships, as you're speaking of, you'll notice like, well, maybe you need to step it up and make some cookies for someone. Or in another case, you might say like a lot of times we think of, oh, like, is that person taking from us? But Shaleia also mentions like, are you not giving to this relationship? I'm paraphrasing. But there are certain times when if you see that someone is really giving to you, but you're not giving back, like really honor that too. And maybe that relationship needs to transform or end in some way. So yeah, it's really good to do an inventory of your relationships and to see where they're at. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Like, I can't tell you how many times like I've been like, oh, well, this relationship's not giving anything to me. You know what I mean? And then like, I guess it's time for that relationship to go without ever testing that relationship, right? Without ever like inviting that piece of revealing. Because a lot of the times it's me that's not giving anything to the relationship, right? I'm like, well, that relationship's not giving anything to me, without like actually turning it and like evaluating what I am giving to that relationship. Because without doing that, it's like you don't really know if it's truly a loving relationship or not, because it might just be that that person's reflecting that you're not putting in anything to the relationship. You know what I mean? It's very important to get clear on that. And like you brought up, Lisi, like maybe it's me, maybe I need to make some cookies, right? Like maybe I like need to be present in my relationships with other people. Maybe that is really what's called for there, and it's not in fact an energy leak.
Yeah, no matter what, every relationship that you've experienced is like a learning experience, as they say. And I really, I think you pointed out one of the points that Michaela realized when she learned more about relationship, is that she felt like she had relationships to get something from people. And yeah, it's really important when you do the inventory of your relationship to see like, is this really a relationship that's not loving, or is there an imbalance? Am I giving? Am I loving there? Because like, whatever you do in your life, like you have to be loving. And so if there's a relationship in your life, there's loving there, and loving can take different forms, like baking cookies, or you know let go of that person. Like, I think it's not diabolical to let go of a person. I think it's more freeing. And because we realize that sometimes we are the ones that are not giving to a relationship, I think it's important not to judge and be angry at relationship imbalances, because this is the pinnacle of work and ascension, and how we live on earth. Like, we're always going to be learning about relationship. And so it's okay to accept where we are now, and also make the choice to improve and have more love in our reality. And it makes me think of the card reading of Cian and Joanna. It was really cool. Like, all these parts of the sermon are shot at different times, but still, I thought it was so, I related to it so much. like being strong and being powerful and shining your light and really making also an inventory of where you are in your life, like where you're giving your strength and energy and how you're behaving. Like, yeah, I feel like the message underneath was like, really sit with God and write things down and do an inventory of your life. And spring has come. It's like maybe it's time for a spiritual spring cleaning, and you're not alone in doing this. Like you you have a God, and you can. It won't hurt to declutter your life and declutter your home and declutter your relationships. Whatever the outcome is, it's like you'll feel better afterwards after giving one or two pair of shoes to people, and because you never wore them in like 4 years, you know what I mean. So I mean, I really get this sense of like, yes, spring cleaning, whatever you want to call it, but it can be spiritual too, and you'll get out stronger afterwards.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, I immediately thought of that Marie Kondo, right? Where like you touch everything to see if it sparks joy, right? Really just feeling into your relationship with everything in your life. Like they were talking about your relationship with cooking, your relationship with cleaning your house, your relationship with like the objects that you possess, right? Really evaluating all of those relationships to see like what is sparking joy in you and what is like giving to the relationship that you're having. And that was just like, that reminded me of that. But I loved in the card reading how Stin was talking about living your whole life from your heart, right? That heart-centered approach to life, connecting with your soul and following that joy and that bliss, and how like choosing to do that, choosing to live from your heart space connects you into that like deep inner knowing inside of you, right? He called it the library of eternal wisdom, right? Where you have like all of this clarity and all of this peace and all of this bliss because you're connected in to that space where God lives inside of you, where your twin flame is inside of you, where your higher self is inside of you. It's living from that heart space and taking that heart-centered approach to life that connects you in to that eternal like library of wisdom, right? And so this is one huge way of really connecting in with that, is evaluating all of those relationships so that you can truly live that heart-centered life.
Sometimes when we begin the twin flame journey and how we are now, it feels like we've changed focus a little bit, like from getting your twin flame to to getting God and Ascension. But I think there was always like one thing that stayed, and Michaela explained it well. It's the fact that you got into this work because you thought you were gonna get something from your twin flame, a relationship. And then you realize that you don't need them, but when you heal, you still get them and you still learn to have relationships. And so, the circle is complete. It's like you thought you were going to have a relationship, but you don't have a relationship quite the way you thought you had a relationship. And then you learn how to have relationships, with everyone and with life. And so there was always like this beautiful core, like this thing linking all the parts of your journey together.
Yeah, I love that. It's like you came to the community looking for something, and then at some point on that journey, you realize that that thing that you've been searching your whole life for, you've had the whole time. And once you realize that like you've had everything that you've been looking for your whole life, then you can relax into that truth. And then you start to attract all of those things in your life. You get the twin flame, you get the life purpose, you get all of the things once you realize you've always had them. That's like the change of perspective of like, surprise, twist ending. Like, it's like, yeah, just embracing the truth of your existence. That you were perfect to begin with. And once you can relax into that like divinity and perfection, that's when you see all of those things manifested in your life. And you're like, holy shit. Like my whole life changed. When really it wasn't so much that your whole life changed as much as it was like your perception of life completely changed.
I think there was also this other thing throughout the service. I think it was about surrendering drama around relationships and around things in general. And I think when you surrender drama and attachment, Jose Miquel has said that you really get to the core of the lesson, you know? And I think it was perfect for what I experienced today, because today is like the second round of presidential election in France. And so I got out to do my things in the morning, super happy, said hi to people, to neighbors in the streets. And some of them were very like at the bureau to vote. Some of them were very like hostile, very like you know, hi, and then go straight out, you know, not really nice. And it's happened to me a lot this week. And I was like, okay, like it stings a little bit, like your landlord just like, he passed you as if he wanted to ignore you, but at the same time it's Sunday. He wants his peace, he doesn't want to be there. Like the presidential are a little bit dramatic, like everyone is tired of it. And then I was like, okay, let's take a step back. You were happy before this happened, like you were living your life. And so are you gonna let this little event change your day? Or are you gonna say like, water off a duck's back and continue on your way and still be happy, still be with God? And I made sure there was like, it was healed in this place, but I think the lesson was just to surrender. Like people want to be hostile on a beautiful Sunday morning, so be it. But I can control them, and that's when I have to let go of attachment. My landlord is like super nice in general, and I care about him. But like, if he wants to be gloomy, then I don't know, can't do anything about it. What I can do is be with God and stay in my peace and stay happy. That's something that's come up a lot for me this week. So I wanted to know, like, have you experienced like anything in that sort, something you could relate to, something about like releasing drama and relationships in the past few weeks?
as you were sharing the story, Yoreen, about the person who just kind of glazed by you, what role does communication have in relationships? For example, like, I know, you know, if it's a stranger across the street, it may not be appropriate to address something, but I'm just curious about, you know, what everyone's thoughts are on communication.
I mean, that's a good one. I don't really know, like in this situation, like the relationship was established, like we pass each other in the streets, we're neighbors, where's my landlord, we say hi to each other. It's like no big deal, it's like a form of respect, a culture on our neighborhood. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot that goes on in this, like, because he said hi also, but there's a lot that goes on in nonverbal communication, because before he got to you know, my side of the street, he was like, no, and you knew he didn't want to be there, he didn't want to vote, he didn't want to cross path with neighbors, but like still, I'm not gonna, maybe he's used to people stopping him because he's a landlord, and maybe he would think that I would breach his boundaries and talk about landlord things on a Sunday when we're not even at the apartment. I thought about it too, but like I didn't. And so I think there was like an expectation to the communication that made him tense as well. Because why would you be tense about like crossing path with a neighbor? Otherwise, like I think it didn't want to be taken from today on his day off outside of the building. And so, yeah, it's a big lesson as well. Like, where is his boundary? And as we all learn to have boundaries and to communicate them, communicate like the boundaries of a relationship, we can all have more loving experiences when we cross paths with each other. So yeah, I think that's my take on the situation. But in general, I don't know. It's kind of a big question, but communication and expectations are definitely a big part of it, I feel. So what
Yeah,
do you
I love
feel?
that you brought up like assumptions and expectations, because a lot of times like upsets occur and like mismatches as far as like giving and taking in relationships occur because boundaries haven't been communicated, right? The two people in the relationship haven't communicated, like, this is how I desire to be loved, right? This is how I desire to be related to. We just kind of assume that people will catch on to how we desire to be related to, right? And you're like, well, I'm upset about this. And it's like, okay, did you let them know that upsets you, or like that you have a boundary there? Well, they should know, because every time they do it, this is how I react. And it's like, okay, but right, part of having relationships with other people is communicating those boundaries, is communicating your rules of relating, of how you desire to be loved in any relationship in your life, right? Whether it's setting boundaries with your friends, setting boundaries with your employer, setting boundaries with your children, setting boundaries with your friends, it is your responsibility to communicate your boundaries. It is not another person's responsibility to try to figure them out, right? Like you were saying, Yureen, like, I think he just assumed that I wanted to talk to him about landlord things. And that's why he was like grumpy, right? But if he's never said, hey, I don't work on Sundays, like, then that's his upset because he hasn't communicated that boundary, right? So I think it's really important to communicate what we desire from all of the relationships in our life. And when someone crosses a boundary, to communicate it with them, whether, regardless of who it is in your life. If you get in a situation where you feel like your boundary has been crossed, it's important to stop and voice that, communicate that. Hey, this felt really bad to me. I would love it if we could try it this way next time, right? That's how you can really create those loving rules of engagement in relationships, is being very honest about like what your boundaries are, and just valuing yourself in that space and respecting like what feels good to you in a relationship.
Yeah, that brings us back to what we were talking about in the beginning, where I think it was you who said, boundaries felt like it was like get away. But actually, when you're communicating to someone, hey, this is how I like to be related to, what it actually means is I want to keep relating to you. I want to go deeper in our relationship. And when it's, when you don't take the time to do that, it may not be a relationship you want to go deeper in. There's always going to be there's never going to be a relationship where you don't have to negotiate boundaries at all, except with God. But, in interpersonal relationships, as you go deeper, yeah, you're going to rub up on some rough edges and be like, oh no, don't step on my foot there. There's also, I've been basically, there's a way to communicate what you do want to, not just, don't do that. No, 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 no. Of course that needs to be said, but a lot of times, it's important to communicate what would feel good or what you desire, and just really get clear on through a conversation, what each person sees the relationship as and what would feel good. I've experienced, and I have unfortunately been on the other end of ending a relationship before seeing it all the way through. That's something that I've learned and practiced through my study of Jeff and Shalea's work and through my relationship with them is, love completely, go all the way and reveal what's really there, find out. And you can't get hurt by finding out. I think I used to be scared to ask those questions like, are you my friend? Or, not really like that, but that's kind of what it was. Are we colleagues or are we friends, or maybe both? So it's important when it gets to that point. And I think something about Yurine's story that she was telling is she was present, right? To gauge, how something is going, it requires presence in that relationship.
Absolutely. I love that. And what you were saying about stating what it is you do want, right? That's something that I do on a daily basis because I'm teaching small children how to relate to other children, right? And so we teach them how to set boundaries. And the way it's framed is tell them what they did that you didn't like and tell them what you would like them to do instead, right? So if another child is touching you and you don't want to be touched, right? It's not enough to yell, stop it, and storm off, right? Because then the other child's like, stop what? What is it that I did that you wanted me to stop? Right? It's a little unclear. But if you say, I don't feel safe when you touch my body, please respect my space, then the other person standing on the other side knows exactly what they did that is not something that is allowed in that relationship, and also what you would like them to do in order to relate with you, right? And to your point, Lisi, it's super important to let people know what action is acceptable, right? Not just all of the things you don't want. That's super important.
Yeah, I agree. And while you were both talking, like I felt like, isn't that a key of harmonious twin flame union? You know, communication, really communicating what you're feeling, why you're feeling this way, and it's so important that you see that in all of your relationship. And I also agree with like the interpersonal relationship tips. It's not just about like, don't do this or don't do that. It's also about like, I'd rather you address me this way, and this is why I don't like it. Like, there's also, there is a lot to the communication of a boundary that also does the job, and it's also part of loving the other person, because it's not about like, I got hurt because you didn't respect my boundary, and so now I'm gonna be vengeful and say don't do that, and then storm off. It's always about loving the other person. You love yourself, but you've loved the other person as well, because if you haven't loved the other person, like, what was the point? Because the boundary is supposed to be loving, you know. So yeah, I think what we are learning, and why this term has come up is that there's a lot to this subject, and there's a lot of misconception of boundaries that we've talked about before, even in the after church tea times. It's important to release like all the negativity, all the resentment, all the harshness that people think that accompany the boundaries, and they are actually punishment and ego and unloving to your brothers and sisters. But it's actually not that. It's always love, always. And yeah, it's always about going back to God. And if that relationship doesn't bring you closer to God, there's something to change, there's a choice to make. And so because you're choosing God, you're choosing love. That's always, that will always be true. So yeah.
Yeah,
But
part
it's,
of that,
yeah,
part of that difference between the punishment or the boundary is that feedback piece, right?
yeah, true.
If you don't provide like the feedback part of it, of like, that is unacceptable, this is acceptable, right? Then it's not really a boundary. It has to have both pieces so that like you know how to navigate it going forwards. Like if your boss just said, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, like you would come away from that review like, okay, so what do I do? Right? Like, what am I supposed to do? That feedback piece is so important. If they say, don't do this, then you're like, okay, I know what to do to be like successful in this relationship, right? It's that feedback is so important and like unfortunately underutilized sometimes.
It's
But
true.
so
It's
important.
true.
And like what you were saying with the communication piece, that relates directly into connection, right? Which is one of those pillars that you were talking about. That connection piece of harmonious twin flame union is so important, because without boundaries, without like those loving, healthy relationships, what happens is you connect and you disconnect, and you connect and you disconnect, and you connect and you disconnect. So to establish a connection, right, there have to be like rules of relating, there have to be boundaries, there have to be like communication of all of those things so that you can connect in a healthy way and stay connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And for example, if a bus doesn't close that feedback loop, I think you would just feel taken from, if not abused, because like it's so important. Like being 100% clear, of course it's a learning curve as well, but being 100% clear about your communication and your boundary and your feedback is part of loving that person, and you have that responsibility, especially as management or as a person that is older, to close that feedback loop. And I think it's so important, so important to love other people, like if you don't have that peace, as you said.
Yeah. And also what happens a lot of times is if you're only saying, don't do this, 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 right? Then at the end of that conversation, what the person you're speaking to hears is like, I don't like you. You didn't do anything right. And then they don't do anything with that information, right? Because they're just like, well, why should I listen to that person? They don't even see who I am. Like, they don't even like appreciate me. I'm not listening to anything they said. And then they're going to end up making the same mistakes again. And then the boss is going to be like, I've already told you this is unacceptable. And then they're like, it creates an entire like
misunderstanding,
self-repeating cycle of like the message of love never made it through because there was a piece missing, right? If you don't feel loved by an interaction, you're not going to seek out that interaction. You're not going to be able to utilize whatever constructive feedback it might have been if the message of love is not getting through.
Kind of go a little deeper. We're all divine beings as well, and we're all connected with source. So even if you're in a situation where you're being told don't, you can, obviously all of us know the mirror exercise, but we can see where we may be treating ourselves that way on the inside. And in this situation where, you know, you may communicate to someone, don't do this, don't do that. It's really what your heart's communicating rather than your words. The person will feel loved if you're loving them and or not, right? They may not feel that love even if you're loving them. You're not responsible for their feelings, and no one's responsible for your feelings either. But your heart is the most accurate communicator because it can feel what is being communicated, whether it's loving or not. Your heart knows. And other people's hearts know as well, although there may be blocks and challenges there. But yeah, I just wanted I agree with what you're saying. And I wanted to just point at the deeper thing, which was, you know, that we do know, even if we're not actually directly told most of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was really important that you added that piece. Thank you. So, yeah, we're approaching the hour. Do you have anything else to say, or do you feel good, complete with this conversation?
I love that we've ended on like, but first, inner work. Right? That's the underlying message of all of it, right? First, inner work, and then everything else.
It was really perfect.
Very complete.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for that piece, Lizzie. Awesome. Then thank you for this conversation. It was very, very good. It felt very expansive, and a good continuation of the sermon. Thank you to everyone who watched this live in our Unionism spiritual discussion group, and thank you to everyone who is watching this from YouTube. If you like our content and would like to see more, don't forget to like this and subscribe, because we put up content several times a week, sermons and live discussions. And yeah, thank you again, and have a good rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Gabby. It's a pleasure.